Dear WISTA members and friends, good evening or good afternoon or good morning in some parts of the world, because we see that we have friends from everywhere watching this evening, and you're all very welcome and thank you for joining on board. Tonight, the webinar is called COVID-19, the reality of the unforeseen. And how we came up with that title, simply because in the beginning of the year, when WISTA Cyprus was considering its annual forum, which was scheduled for April, we decided to consider unforeseen circumstances and how the industry was dealing with them. COVID, which at the time had not set foot in Europe, was one of those things that we thought, maybe we should include COVID in this forum. 5 months later, and the forum have never taken place, obviously, because like most events have been cancelled. COVID has become a pandemic that has taken the world by storm, with unprecedented impact on the world societies and economies. The shipping industry has been right in the eye of the storm, and whilst ships have been the only mode of transportation operating worldwide, it has seriously been impacted by port delays, quarantine measures, etc., but most importantly, issues directly related to crew. And within the spirit of the Day of the Seafarer, which was celebrated last week, we felt that we should dedicate this webinar to real crew-related cases which the industry has faced during this time. And we take a closer look how the ship owners and the P&I clubs have dealt with these unforeseen situations. You're going to be hearing some stories that if someone gave you as scenarios in case studies a few months ago, you would say, nah, but yet they have happened. So to share these experiences with us at this webinar, which is organized by WISTA Cyprus, we're very pleased to have with us 4 WISTA members from WISTA Brazil and WISTA Hellas. So say hello to Paula da Costa, Senior Operations Manager, Dry Cargo in Norden, Rio de Janeiro. Elizabeth Wood, Senior Claims Manager, West of England, Hellas. Joanna Koukouli, Deputy Global Claims Director, S.V.P Joint Managing Director, excuse me because the writing is small, Shipowners Claims Bureau, / American Club. Have I said it all, Joanna?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And last but not least, Joanna Pavlides, General Manager of the London P&I Club Piraeus office. Ladies, welcome aboard, and we really do look forward to the interesting webinar that you are going to deliver to us. Without more delay, I would like to first give the floor to Paula, who, representing the industry, the shipping industry on this panel, will give us her view of how the industry has seen or has come across these unforeseen circumstances that we'll be talking about, what challenges they have had, and how they dealt with, so that, Anna, if you like to set the scene for us, for our audience, and then we can take over with the actual cases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and thank you for the kind words. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody, and to be here and just moving forward. Okay, the industry, I guess, is we sailed through very turbulent waters in the very beginning of the pandemic, when it was officially declared as a world pandemic. There was a huge uncertainty over the market and how this will run, and a lot of fears. And basically, one of the biggest fears was, were we going back to 2008, where we had the major crash in the market that laid up almost all the fleet. As we saw the way that the governments were dealing with it, and there was not a global response or coordinated response and role from the governments, and each country taking its own measures, and countries locking down ports. In some places that we saw, they were completely shut down. Inland logistics not working, with city closed. We had this in Brazil. There's a lot of cities being locked down, not allowing people to, not only people, but key services to run as it should. So there was this big fear what was to happen with the global trade and obviously with the shipping industry in this. Crew members were in the center of all this scenario on the concerns of the ship owners and managers and operators, because we didn't know there was a lot of crews that had to disembark already and would not be allowed to. And there was a question as what would be the length of their confinement on board. You know, at that time, nobody believed that we could foresee what we saw right now, 5 months, 4 months, and crew having sometimes close to a year on board already. And among many other things that we saw, it was related to the ship, the operation itself of the vessels, because you had to fine tune everything. Operation desks had to jump in and take the helm of this situation. It was on the operations desk hands to make it run the smoothest way possible, because we could have surveyors that not go on board. We have ships having to go through a complete disinfection in the ports. If any kind of any crew show any symptom, whatever it was, the ship operations will be hampered, as it happened recently in Santos with a vessel. And then only after it was tested and the entire crew was tested, the ship being negative, we could go back to operations. How this would be dealt in the market and by the charter side, because we had a lot of ongoing contracts already, vessels arriving at the ports for discharge or loading, and how this would be handled. With the charters have to be entitled to invoke the force majeure for this situation, vessels being quarantined, how would we negotiate everything with the charters, clauses were coming up. So it was a massive, a very tough situation for owners at that time. And what we saw was that business continued to run, and we had a lot of cargoes being fixed, and with all the new scenarios on how would be going for the new contracts and dealing with the old contracts, which this was, I think, also a very important issue for owners, though, how to take this and how to include the pandemic in the contracts. We also think that we had a disruptive situation, which was remote working. For an industry like ours that is very traditional and conservative still, there's a lot of resistance for technology, digitalization. I think this was a disruption in a good way, where we owners and basically could see that we could run the business and deliver as if we were in the office without many and too many constraints on that side. Okay, so in my point of view, what we saw here was, as the very beginning was really hot, okay, that we did not know exactly how this would evolve in terms inside the industry with our customers and also in the world. We saw the disease growing and the infections coming and hitting the countries. We still have a critical situation in many of them. Brazil is in the list. But I think that we emerged after 4 months, I guess, when we emerged from this better than we thought when we started all this situation, all this scenario of the pandemic. Okay, and I think that we are now sailing in less turbulent waters. We have already the contracts being adjusted and settled, as the clauses are in, and there's a new clause that's coming about the crew change, that the owners will have the right to deviate the vessels, as happened with emergency calls or bunkering. So I think that now everything is starting to settle in the industry, and we are now going to sail in more easy waters from now on. This is basically what we have. There were big things. Norden itself, speaking on our side, we didn't face many issues, you know, and that became to be a major situation to our company. We have Danish, Filipino, and Indian crew on board. Obviously, we could manage with the Danish one. Indian, we could also find solutions nearby in Colombia. The Filipinos became really a big problem because there was this restriction on their own country by their own government that we could not release them from board, okay, or embark on new ones. But generally speaking, the view is that we could manage the situation in a better way than we thought in the beginning of the COVID, of the pandemic, and we are emerging as in a better way, in a better shape right now. Okay, capable to do with this. We know that we have still a way to go with this. It would be ups and downs, would be like waves now that we are going to see, and some cities and countries going back to the lockdown. But I think that what started is that ports operations cannot stop, the logistics cannot stop, they are key services. And it was this last not to be done and to manage or to just make it work right is to have the seafarers as also as the key workers. So then we don't risk any now a major disruption of the chain, because if they just go down, the whole industry will go down, and the global trade will all go down. So we need this to be taken more seriously or more effectively by our governments. This is really our main problem right now, as we already walk through this 5 months. So this is basically what I have to give to you in an owner's perspective. Right?
Well, that is a very broad landscape, and I think people. Once you hear it all in one go, I mean, every day we've been dealing with individual, isolated problems, all of us at different times, but to hear about it, I mean, I was just writing notes down, and it's just like a full A4. And I mean, Anna mentioned, the uncertainty to start with. I mean, that's a perfect setting of the scene. Different measures, different countries. Crew members right in the center of all this situation, and we're talking obviously the normal crew changes, expired contracts, what do expired contracts mean, what do expired licenses mean, and obviously that's just not renewing the license, that means renewing the license to comply with insurances. We're talking about surveyors not being able to attend, and again, effect on insurance if they can't attend, on their classes they can't attend. We had to see virtual surveys being done, charter parties being amended, force majeure has been mentioned, and then obviously a lot of things come into this conversation: COVID, quarantine, deviation, force majeure, charter party clauses. So as far as the industry is concerned, this is all that they've had to deal with. But in addition, the rest of you ladies have had to deal with what would have normally been normal cases and normal crew cases, that all of a sudden, because of this landscape that they existed in, they became horror scenarios or nightmare cases, if I may use the case. So, and you all have one case to share with us. So I'll give the floor to Elizabeth Wood first. To share her story. Hello, Elizabeth.
The sound is off. The sound is off.
Hi, okay. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. I was on mute. Hope you can all hear me okay now. Hope everybody's doing well and keeping safe. We're lucky in Greece. Things are almost back to normal, but we're waiting for an influx of tourism, so we don't know what's around the corner. So, just to introduce myself again, so I'm the senior claims handler at West of England at the Greek office, and I've been a member of WISTA since 2014, which is great. And also to put in a plug for West, I just wanted to mention that we have a dedicated page on our website for COVID-19. It includes frequently asked questions, and that's regularly updated. And we're also very much involved in contributing to the working groups at the IG level. And also our loss prevention team are giving lots of proactive advice to members, specifically on mental health issues with crew and how to deal with these on board as a result of COVID. And on that point, I'm going to lead on to my main example of a scenario that we've experienced here in west of England in Greece, and it involved a master who was affected mentally by the stress and the pressure of COVID, and also, I believe, from the exposure over the media, which you know, was very dramatic and really sort of highlighted the problems and the deaths and the infection rates all over the world. And of course, when you're on a ship, isolated, that all becomes, you know, sort of very bigger than maybe it would do if you're in the society general. So so the vessel was due to discharge at Chittagong, and basically the master refused to let the cargo be discharged from the ship because he said he was concerned of the crew's safety and health due to COVID. And the whole crew supported the master. They actually had meetings to discuss how they were going to handle the situation, and they were taking votes, and it was, you know, it was all done very democratically on board, but master, of course, was the spokesperson for them. And I think he was kind of the sort of ringleader, let's say, for want of a better word, and, you know, making the rest of the crew very anxious about the situation. And there was clearly issues with master because he basically ordered the crew to put up barbed wire all around the ship. He absolutely refused to let anyone come on board the ship. He made demands for a floating crane to do the cargo operations, and indicating that he wouldn't let any stevedores on board, or so he wanted to basically discharge the cargo at anchorage, didn't want to berth. No personnel of any kind were going to be allowed on board. He also asked for specifically for supplies of PPE. And when they, you know, when they were brought to try and load them, then he wouldn't even let them come on board because he was afraid that people had touched the packaging, and he wouldn't let the PPE come on board. And also, it actually included in that package, there was some very important medication for one of the crew who had an ongoing medical issue, and he wouldn't even allow the medication to be put on board. So we're facing a serious situation here with the master. He was really kind of out of control, and he wouldn't see reason at all. So anyway, the crew also contacted the IMO. Of course, the crew hadn't been abandoned, and people were actively trying to help the situation and give advice to master and calm his worries. But they still contacted IMO, and the CEO here in the Greek office was contacted by a human rights lawyer. This human rights lawyer made a long list of allegations about owners and the treatment of the crew, which were all untrue, you know. But you know, trying to convince human rights lawyers of that, it's quite difficult. We had correspondents instructed, of course, and they were trying to intervene with the master and give him comfort, to let him know that the discharge operations were being carried out normally by other ships at Chittagong, and the port authorities were taking all the proper measures, taking all the precautions that they needed to do to ensure the safety of the crew. And you know, COVID tests, personnel coming on board were all being tested for COVID to make sure that they were not infected if they were going to be boarding the ship. But the master absolutely refused to sort of take note of this, and he maintained that he would not have anyone on board. He demanded that the ship be sent on deviate to the nearest Indian port, because the master and the crew on board were Indian. And it definitely seemed, the more that we talked to the master, that he seemed to have some sort of, you know, he was being affected mentally by the stress of the situation of COVID and the pandemic. And I'm convinced that it was this was even made more by the fact that the media that they were watching on board, you know, the clips on YouTube and all the rest of the stuff that went out over even in the beginning, but even, you know, over the first couple of months of COVID, must have affected his psychology, and we thought that he was suffering from mental illness, really, as a result of it, and arising from the stress of the whole situation. So the owners were trying to find a solution to this whole problem, but of course it was very, very difficult to have the master replaced because of travel restrictions. And they actually did locate a local crew. I think there were 5 crew members that were located in Chittagong that could have joined the vessel. But the problem was that the correspondents advised that the departing crew could only be repatriated if they had a valid ticket. And of course, I'm sure that you're all aware of the horrendous situation with travel restrictions. And it was absolutely impossible to arrange for a ticket that might not be cancelled at the last minute. You know, we've had that issue across the board with repatriating and also with ill and injured crew members not being able to get flights back to their home countries. But the owners were very, very concerned about Master's psychological state, and also they were concerned that even if they did find a ticket, that he would refuse to disembark, because he wasn't even allowing anyone on board. So, you know, getting him off was also a problem. So we did actually seek legal advice. We looked into potentially having him removed, sectioned for a mental disorder. But it was clear that the whole process of going down the legal route was going to be a nightmare, because of course all the courts were closed because of COVID. So, you know, there was no easy solution to this. We were very, very lucky because the flag intervened, and they communicated with the master and eventually convinced him to start discharging. And that went fairly smoothly after that. But once the discharging had completed, they were due to sail to Sri Lanka to take armed guards, and the master decided that he wasn't going to go to Sri Lanka, that he was going to take him and his crew home. And so he set off to sail to Chennai, but fortunately, through owners' intervention, they managed to redirect him, and so he only deviated for 25 nautical miles. But so yeah, that's basically the scenario that we had to deal with the master. And we have a number of other examples, but I don't know if you want me to go into those now, or maybe we can touch on them later.
Well, I think thank you first of all, Elizabeth, with this, oh my God, situation.
Yeah.
I think, you know, to try and also manage our time, maybe if we do one round of cases, and then if time allows us, then we can, you know, elaborate a bit more. But obviously, none of these would have normally been a normal P&I case under the circumstances. And obviously, I'm sure there have been a few fields or gaps or areas somewhere where you have had to take a closer look as to, yes, we're doing this, but what is actually covered, what isn't covered, what would fall here and there, and, you know, is this just the tip of the iceberg, and then we're going to find something underneath afterwards once the case is over. But I think we're going to come and have a discussion about who picks up the bill later. So
yeah, that's true.
And may we go to Joanna Pavlides now, please?
Sure. Hi from me too, and thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. Like all the other clubs, we have also been quite busy the last few months, looking at the changes and measures in different countries around the world, and giving our members, trying to provide them with as updated information as possible, because things keep on moving quite quickly, and be there for them to give them advice on their contracts and other situations that have come up because of the COVID pandemic. Thankfully, here at the London Club, we have not had the kind of horror stories that Liz just mentioned. We did have a case that is a prime example for something that would have been so easy under normal circumstances, turning into a nightmare, or in terms of time and logistics for the owners. On our occasion, this started with one of the crew members feeling quite ill just outside South Africa. The rest of the crew were a bit anxious around him. They wouldn't even go near him to take his blood pressure because he seemed to have all the COVID symptoms. He had difficulty breathing, he had a high fever. So in consultation with the Red Cross, it was decided that he had to be air evacuated immediately, which we did. And when he got into the hospital, he tested positive for COVID. Of course, when the rest of the crew on board the ship found out, they started becoming quite restless. We managed to disinfect the ship, but of course it's difficult to quarantine on a ship, as not enough space. So we tried and managed to get a private medical company to send 2 people on board and test the rest of the crew, just for their own peace of mind. And out of the 22, 8 more tested positive. All of them were symptomatic. No one could trace back to where they could have caught the virus. But of course, the situation on board the ship started getting very, very tense indeed. And then started this logistical nightmare, where we tried, with the help of our correspondents, to find some way to get these 8 crew off the ship so that they could at least go through their quarantine ashore. First, we had a problem locating a hotel that would even take them ashore. The correspondence, there was not one hotel in the whole of the city of Durban that would be willing to provide a few rooms that for quarantine purposes. And when we did find one, we had to assist them to go through the whole process with the authorities to get sanitary protocols and set the rooms up and all that. And in the meantime, of course, we had to go through getting a permit from the local authorities to take the ship into port from the anchorage, because by that stage, everyone had learned that there was a COVID outbreak on board, and there were no launches that would be willing to go out to the ship to take these people off. It took us almost 3 weeks, and it took us going to the highest government levels just to get a no answer at the end. So no one really wanted anything to do with the ship. By that stage, it was almost a month. We were sitting at anchorage, with everyone getting quite agitated, it has to be said. The crew were tested again. They were found negative this time, and the ship just was able to sail on her course to her next port. The crew that was originally air evacuated recovered, thankfully, but almost 6 weeks later, he's still in South Africa, waiting to be
Joanna froze.
repatriated, because the country is still in lockdown, and with the Philippines going under these restrictions for the entry of the seafarers, possible to know when repatriation might be possible. So it's just one example of something that should have been easy, becoming quite difficult indeed, and very costly as well.
Wow. So, Joanna, you still
lost. Sorry, that was me. My internet went dead for a while, for a bit. I don't know what.
You froze on us for a while.
Lost me. Yeah, sorry.
We left it, I think, well, at least I left it, where you froze at the point where you started saying he stayed there for 6 weeks.
Yes. Well, that was almost the end, so that's okay. I was saying that he's still there. We have no idea when he might be able to be repatriated because the country is still in lockdown and the Philippines have the restrictions on the entry of the seafarers. So it's a long trip.
Can I ask a question just for clarification of the setting of the case for possible questions later? Was the ship loaded? Sorry, I didn't recall if you mentioned. So the ship wasn't
we were
balanced.
very lucky there because she was not loaded, and well, she was on her way to a contract, which obviously lost.
She lost. Yeah. Okay, but she was not lost. Okay.
No.
It's getting more and more interesting by the minute. So over to you, Joanna Koukouli, for another story. What do you have in store for us?
Thank you, Anna. First of all, I would like to thank WISTA Cyprus for your kind invitation and the opportunity to participate in this truly current discussion. From the American Club's pool of experience, I can refer to one quite characteristic case, which was back in late March. A crew member of one of our US-based members started exhibiting flu-like symptoms as soon as his shift ended. It should be borne in mind that during this time, hospitals in New York were completely overwhelmed, and there was a huge backlog for testing, which essentially led to testing becoming virtually unavailable. Luckily, the crew member's wife, who happened to be a nurse, managed to have him tested at the hospital where she worked, and the results came out positive for COVID-19 within 48 hours. As was the hospital protocol at the time, the crew member was sent home for the prescribed treatment and necessary confinement. However, since the other 8 crew members had spent 2 weeks with him on board, obviously there was a high risk that they may have contracted COVID-19 as well. Indeed, 4 of them exhibited flu-like symptoms. However, although we reached out to all local hospitals, there was no way to have the crew members tested, not even privately. This was unfortunately the period between late March and early April when cases in New York were at a very high peak, which made it impossible for us to positively ascertain whether these 4 crew members had actually been infected with COVID-19 or not. So all 5 crew members, of course, remained at home and received the prescribed medical treatment and were monitored twice a day in view of this unique situation. To give you an example, we even arranged for a crew member's fridge to be stocked with food since he lived all alone and was prevented from leaving his home to shop for necessaries. Another serious aspect that arose was with the healthy crew members who were developing anxiety about possibly having been exposed, which anxiety was aggravated due to the prevailing panic in the country at the time. Mental wellness is an important aspect of the health and well-being of the crew on board a ship for the American Club, which is reflected in our mental health awareness initiative developed long before the COVID-19 related issues arose, since incidents resulting from a seafarer's mental breakdown will have significant consequences for our members and ship's crew. In this respect, we arranged for the necessary support from the available resources so as to ensure that the physically healthy crew members remained mentally stable. And of course, it goes without saying that during these challenging times, we at the American Club insist on reminding our members of our mental health guidance and the plethora of mental health contacts and resources listed in our website.
Well, so basically, I mean, it all goes down to mental health and how everyone is dealing with it. And it was something I intended to ask Anna Paula earlier. What about, I mean, we talk about the crew all the time and trying to get them home and trying to provide, healthcare during all this, but what about their families? I mean, back home, I mean, have you been receiving pressure on that front? I mean, obviously, a traditional ship owner, say in Greece, that has direct contact with the families, or I don't know, in the Middle East, where, you know, some years back, the families, the companies had direct contact with the families. I mean, I don't know now on the current scenery, whether you have had to deal with situations of families or reassuring them, or how they're coping with this. I don't know if any of you ladies, the question goes to everyone, if you've had any.
Well, from one side here, I think our HR department, okay, it had a guide, and a guide that went to the operators, because we're the one that deal with the ships directly and the crew. As I said, it was in the center of owners' concern about the crew health, because mental health issue is something that precedes the COVID-19. It was already like talks on the shadow of the industry about this, and we had our HR department very on top of this relation with the crew's families, okay, trying to keep the spirits up. And also on board with the guys, the keeping of their spirits up and guiding us on how to deal with the masters. I had one case I forgot to mention, a master in the middle of the Amazon to load, and he was really starting to show signs of stress, not wanting to allow anybody to go on board except the pilots. Okay. So in the Amazon, you have to go with authorities on board to clear the vessels, no matter what the circumstances. So I got here for 1 hour on the phone, and he would call me, and he was stressed. We could see that he was like almost shouting on the phone. And I have taken 1 hour to calm him down and explain him how the procedures would be going. And he was worried about his family as well, because he said, if I get something, what's going to happen to my family? I said, so don't worry about that, because we are on top of that. We are talking with the managers, we are talking with everybody, and to keep so you need to, I think the bigger thing is how to calm down them on board, because they also don't pass this to their families, you know, the way they are, because they also talk to their families. And there was this open this channel for them that would widen their internet cables and connections, so they could be talking to their families, and how this would be seen by the family. So we are playing on both sides, you know, not us this specific directly, but our HR department. And if we had any under ship management, also the ship management was a strict guidance to keep supporting the families, okay, and whatever they needed. You know, if they needed medical attendance, if they needed supplies, whatever, to do this. So this is what we have done. While we as operation desk, we were dealing with the crew and trying to keep their spirits up and calm down, because it was really stressful. It is really stressful. We still see captains that don't want, really, as I think Elizabeth said, don't want to allow or Joanna said, that don't want to allow anybody to go on board the ships.
And of course, you know, understanding needs to be shown. You know, how can you criticize or judge? But we've heard different cases, and I'm like wondering, you know, we're in the hat of the broker now. Obviously, Joanna Pavlides, the London Club case, was straightforward COVID. You know, like you know, Joanna Koukouli's case, straightforward COVID illness. So it all falls neatly under, you know, coverage, almost neatly, of club rules. But I keep wondering about Elizabeth's case, because you've had no incident. So how do you stick that under coverage? How did you manage to put all that under your P&I club cover?
Well, I mean, circumstances, there was, I mean, it obviously wasn't COVID related, but it was an aftershock from COVID. And so clearly it didn't fall into any of the cover it would normally fall into. But I mean, we took the view that the master was suffering from a mental stress condition. And that was the reason why he was behaving in the manner he was. And so obviously we assisted our members as far as we could. I mean, there were certain aspects that we couldn't assist with because there was no way that we could, you know, make any connection with a P&I risk. But we assisted as far as we could, and in the manner that I've just described. So.
Yeah. Well, interesting. And if I may go to Joanna Koukouli now, because she's wearing another hat as well, as she's sitting here on this panel. Joanna, if I'm not mistaken, you are also a member of the international group's COVID working group, right?
Yes, correct.
And we are all aware that the industry has been taking, you know, steps right from the beginning. You know, the ICS, the IMO, the ITF, everybody have been trying to find ways and solutions right from the beginning. Some of them, you know, had future, some of them didn't. You know, there were plans that were killed off by various governments. Not really cooperating or killing it off at their end, as Paula mentioned about the Philippines earlier. And we have seen a lot of effort from the industry, and obviously whatever the industry suggests always goes to the group for support, because most of the times in extraordinary circumstances we are requesting things to be done outside the norm. And therefore, we've had situations where we're talking about deviating vessels to be able to perform crew changes, and you know, questions raised: would that deviation be covered, for instance, or you know, what about the clauses? What about the bills of lading? You know, as a result of that deviation, you know, if we all agree that we're going to take the ship and deviate, you know, we need SOL cover. Obviously, all these things must have been right in the forefront of what you've been looking at, and maybe you want to share some of that some of those concerns that you've had to deal with and dealt with, and you know, maybe what the scenario is.
Yes, indeed, Anna. The international group's COVID working group was formed back in March in order to address the plethora of issues that were continuously arising as a result of the unprecedented situation that the COVID-19 outbreak had created on a global scale. More specifically, as issues were raised across the international group's standard subcommittees, in order to avoid duplications, the working group was formed ad hoc to deal with the aspects of P&I affairs affected by the COVID pandemic on a centralized basis. Since March, we have come a long way. We started from streamlining the IG's launch of a publicly accessible COVID-19 digital tracking tool, a dashboard, to assist ship owners, charters, operators, and other parties in the maritime sector to track country and port-specific advice around the world, and detail the measures being put in place in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a single user-friendly source, making the most up-to-date and pertinent information on COVID measures applicable in different jurisdictions readily available and accessible, and allows parties to identify commercial risks and physical threats worldwide. So the tool sources data from all 13 international group clubs, the IMO, the World Health Organization, and other leading sources. So the American Club, in collaboration with colleagues in the group, continues to participate in updating this extremely useful tool, which can be found on the International Group's website. Now, from a claims perspective, the working group has been the forum for discussing the various COVID-related issues that arise in day-to-day claims handling and for troubleshooting on various queries relating to the operation of P&I cover that members were raising as they were facing new challenges due to the global outbreak. This facilitated the creation of a pool of scenarios, which most, if not all, IG clubs drew from in order to formulate frequently asked questions, thus highlighting the most commonly encountered issues and how club cover would respond thereto. The American Club's COVID-19 Quick Reference Guide can be found on its website, where it addresses practical problems that members have been facing amidst the pandemic vis-a-vis P&I insurance. I don't know, would you want me to refer to other
Well, actually, on the coverage part, in terms of, I mean, the principle is that all club rules are almost
more
the same,
or less similar,
more or less the same, with some variations, but the principle of coverage is the same across all clubs. And then, of course, there is, you know, what a few owners have appealed to discretion under the circumstances, and I'm sure you have all been called to pull that card out of your sleeve, you know, under the circumstances. But obviously, it is a pandemic, and we've got one question from a member of the audience, and maybe Joanna Pavlides is the right person to answer that one, since maybe it's related to the case that you've mentioned. It relates to crew wages. Stroke, sickness wages, crew wages, and in particular about ill crew members that disembark for treatment, like your COVID case, for instance. They are declared fit to work, but by the time they declare fit to work, either the ship leaves or they're stuck in the country where they've received the medical treatment, whether it was injury or illness or whatever. And they simply cannot be repatriated back home. So how does the club treat those situations? Obviously, the owner is liable to pay wages, but how much of that would be covered under standard P&I rules?
I think you answered the question, because you have to look, I mean, the club would cover owner's legal liabilities towards the crew. So if under the contract the owner is liable to pay sick wages until he's repatriated, then that's what we would cover.
Yeah, but still, so would there be a differentiation between when he's declared fit to work, or the cutoff?
No, because he's waiting for repatriation. Well, in our case, he's waiting for repatriation. He's not there out of choice. He's there because he has to remain there until he's repatriated. So it would be, and under his contract, he's entitled to his wages until he is repatriated for medical reasons.
I mean, Elizabeth, what was the most frequent question that you've had in terms of coverage at the West of England?
Well, we had a lot of questions about quarantine because, of course, in order for cover to kick in for quarantine expenses, additional expenses, there has to be an outbreak on board. And so, you know, there's certain situations when there's suspected COVID positive, but in fact turns out to be negative. You know, we had a ship that arrived from China in the US, and she wasn't allowed to berth because there was one crew member who showed COVID symptoms and he tested negative. But even so, the US imposed a quarantine on the ship. So, I mean, the question was, is that covered? Well, actually, no, I'm sorry, it's not covered under the rules, unfortunately, because there was no outbreak on board the ship. So that, you know, it's these instances which fall in the gaps, you know, that it's very difficult for us to deal with. But unfortunately, you know, the rules are the rules, and we have to, you know, we do as much as we can to assist, but there's only as much so much we can do. So in those circumstances, there would have been no P&I liability.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Anna Paula, then loss of hire kicks in and delay, doesn't it?
A lot. There's a situation, it's like if you look at Argentina, major coastal flow of vessels out heading to Argentina to load, and you have two ports there, there's Bahia Blanca and Necochea, that imposed a quarantine to the vessels. They're sailing from infected areas with less than 14 days, which is Brazil and Chile, and then you get you get like in the middle of this, and because you have to put a ship to attend your charter, and not all the time you're going to get a ship that is sailing with more than 14 days. And then, so either you have to just sit there because it's the rule, you sit there and you have the hire that you pay, but the time is not counting. And you also have the situations that there's no outbreak on board. We had a vessel that there was a surveyor that went on board. He was tested on COVID. He was showing the symptoms. And then the port decided to suspend the operations of the ship because of this. It was not a crew member. And then he was tested, it was negative. They decided to test the whole crew and also disinfect the ship anyways. And only after all the results came off, they allowed the vessel to go back to operations again. But then we are going to a discussion right now. What we do with this time that the vessel had stopped the operations, and it was nothing to do with the vessel, with a surveyor that went on board. Mm-hmm. There is a lot. We know that some of this might go to arbitration at some point if we don't get a commercial agreement. We are working for commercial agreements, but this thing of the quarantine, this situation, this issue of the quarantine is very specific one, and we stay because there's no coverage also in the clause. It's very clear for the charters, friendly to the charters, saying that time will not count on the new contracts. But if you have a time chartering vessel, we also have to find out with the owners, you know, if your vessel go in quarantine, and they can allege that, okay, you sent my vessel to a port where you have this problem. This will be an interesting discussion, you know, to go on.
Yeah.
With
well, it throws us. I mean, we did say, you know, it was mostly crew related, but you know, since we do have time, I mean, yeah, it is something which affects people, and quarantine is because people get sick and all that, and then we end up in a legal battle. I mean, how about FD&D cases, ladies? Have you seen yet claims, FD&D claims that are COVID related or challenged or disputed?
As far as we're concerned, we were mostly disputes arose quite early in the day. It mostly had to do with port calls to China as the COVID pandemic was spread. Well, it wasn't a pandemic yet. It was as the COVID epidemic was spreading. It was a question of whether the owner has the right to refuse to call the port. There were issues of safe port. There were issues of, we had cases where the charter had purported to cancel the charter party because there was no available cargo anymore. The operations had been disrupted to such an extent that the voyage had to be canceled, and whether the frustration criteria were being met. We all know how difficult it is to establish frustration. Luckily, in all cases that we have dealt with, a commercial solution was found, because you know, the parties were serious operators. They genuinely wanted a solution to be found, and so we didn't have any FD&Ds, COVID-related FD&Ds that really erupted, and you know, leading to big cost exposures, thankfully.
And it was the same. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say it was the same
for Joanna. Sorry.
It was the same for us, exactly the same. There were a lot of questions right at the beginning of the pandemic, but again, because everyone is in the same boat, most of the disputes were settled commercially. The other thing we also saw were a few disputes under MOAs, sale and purchase MOAs.
Yeah.
And mostly it had to do with the fact that either sellers could not disembark their crew or buyers could not embark their crew. I mean, and mostly if you're a seller and you can't tender NOR until you are able to disembark your crew. So you're not physically ready in all respects to deliver the ship to someone new unless you're able to take your crew off. And we had 2 instances where the contracts had to be cancelled because our members were just not able to find flights to get their crew off. And we had one other instance where the port of delivery was changed to somewhere much more, you know, reasonable, or where restrictions were not that strict. But again, most of the disputes were settled commercially, as Joanna said.
Elizabeth?
We also experienced issues with sales and purchase, with the crew not being able to, arriving crew not being able to get there on time for the delivery. And again, most of these have been settled commercially without ill effects, because of course, you know, we have good members and they're understanding the situation. We had some other issues, well, force majeure being declared, and which has led to charter party disputes and disputes under contracts of affreightment for dead freight, because the reasoning behind it is that the COVID pandemic has caused a reduction in the demand for certain products, and so, you know, targets haven't been met and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, it's basically claiming COVID as a force majeure event to avoid paying dead freight. So there are a number of different sort of issues that arise from COVID as far as FD&D is concerned. We have another couple of things that I could mention. There's a potential dispute against either pilots or against a shipyard, where a vessel is stuck outside trying to dry dock, and because there are no tests, or the crew haven't been tested, but they've been isolated for quite a number of months, and so there's been no indication. They've been basically self-isolating, and there's been no symptoms, but the pilots are refusing to go on board the vessel to take her into dry dock. So, there are other issues that are arising around they're all kind of COVID related. So, yeah.
We've got another question from this one is from the audience, and it refers again to sickness wages or wages. What if, due to a crew positive to COVID, hold on a second. what if a crew, wait a minute, I have two, I'm sorry, I'm not very good with that. There's apparently two questions. The first one was, what if a crew member who has already been contracted to join a vessel is tested positive and therefore as a result never embarks on the vessel? Will that crew member be allowed to sickness wages, and how is what's the future of that case?
I can answer this question if you want.
Yep. Go ahead.
Well, I'm aware that any crew members that develop COVID during transportation to join the vessel would be covered under P&I because the transportation to and from the vessel embarking and disembarking would be a P&I liability. So he would be treated normally as a sick crew member.
Okay, and there's another one which could be a tricky one. What if, due to a crew being positive to COVID, as a result of which the vessel is not allowed to berth or discharge, and as a result of that delay, say if Joanna's vessel, that's one for Joanna Pavlides, if Joanna's vessel was loaded and she could not approach to discharge, and as a result the cargo was damaged, how far, it says the question, how far would the club go to cover such damage?
I don't, so it will be, there could be a delay claim. I think you would look at that separately, a cargo damage claim if you're under a bill of lading. Would be covered. Liability towards the cargo interest under the bill of lading would be covered. So
I think potentially would it not fall under the quarantine? Well, assuming that the vessel's been quarantined. I mean, if the delay is caused as a result of a quarantine, it would fall under the quarantine rule, and then whoever's responsible, I guess it would fall under quarantine. Sorry?
Yeah.
Depending on the expenses and the claims being covered.
Yeah, it would depend on the terms of the charge party.
And the terms and the way the quarantine rules are worded, because I don't think they're
they're not homogeneous.
The same across all clubs. Yeah. I mean, for us,
they have some small
specific
differentiations.
That leads us nicely to the next question, which is, if there is a quarantine order, what costs are covered under the club cover? I mean, someone is asking specifically, for instance, shifting, running costs which wouldn't have been incurred but for the outbreak of COVID. Would that be picked up under the quarantine? That's the question.
Again, if I may, I think it depends on how the actual rule is worded. I think for us, it would be any expenses incurred for the safety of the ship. So if you have disinfection expenses or things like that, that would be included.
So not consequential. For instance, the ship is ordered to shift,
for example, no.
Right, so the rule is strict in that respect.
Well, I have our rule in front of me at the moment, and I can read it to you if you like.
Yeah, please.
It basically says the additional expenses incurred by member as a direct consequence of an outbreak of infectious disease on board the entered vessel. And that would include quarantine and disinfection expenses and the net loss to members over and above any expenses that would have normally been incurred. And that means in respect of fuel, insurance, wages, stores, provisions, and port charges.
So you're specifying, yeah. Okay, well, I believe this is adequately answered. And then there's one for Anna Paula. Did you revise or have to revise your processes, re-charter parties, crewing processes due to the issues encountered?
Yeah, we did. We had to review and sometimes renegotiate. And in terms of crew, I guess this was more on the hands of our period desk when dealing with the ships. But basically, there are clauses in the CP that were redraft to try to cover or be something more in between for both owners and charters, and this, yeah, we did.
Yeah. How do you feel about? That's my question now. How do you feel about the new BIMCO clause about deviation?
I think this is something that we all saw as coming, but I think it's a fair clause. Okay, if we can deviate for bunkers and for emergency, let's call this like an emergency call. You know, I guess I think this will fall under this emergency situation that you need to disembark the crew. And this is a way, I think that people found to try to find a solution if we don't have governments cooperating or creating this, like say, this corridor that we can just disembark and embark the crew in a safety way with all the measures and everything. And it's a way that we have to send the ships and deviate to the nearest port where obviously now you have and you can perform this crew change. We have been seeing some requests when we are with vessels in time charter, owners coming and asking what are the intentions for the ship, which trade we want to put, if there's any possibility or an opportunity to send the ship to areas where we can perform or they can perform their crew change, you know, because they're already reaching the limits. And so I think it's a normal clause right now. Okay? It's a very fair clause if you see and you look back in the situation of the crew. I don't see anybody will complain about it. You know, that you can have this option to deviate also for crew change. As I said, I think it falls all under the emergency situation. It's already an emergency situation involving the crews and the seafarers.
Thank you. And there's another one for you, Anna, I guess. Have you found yourself in situations where you have had to sort of not compromise, but change your selection criteria for crew to be able to maneuver around these restrictions? I.e., I don't know, nationality or, you know, based on travel restrictions?
No. Straightforward, no. We had no. As I said, and the Norden own vessels, the crew are Danish, Indian, Filipino. But even being Filipino, this being managed as best as it can be. But no, we didn't need to do anything like that to change the criteria and anything. No. It's still we get available and the best crew on board. It's.
Mm-hmm. I mean, again, one question before we wrap up. I haven't seen any other questions from the audience, but before we wrap up, I mean, we did touch upon you know, the merchant shipping mostly, really, because we all seem to be operating in that. But there's also a big part of the industry that has been affected, and that's the cruise industry. And obviously there, the problem is much bigger, and it does take, you know, bigger dimensions, both in terms of handling and financial. Has any of you ladies experienced any issues with cruise lines, passenger ships?
I think we all have.
Silence.
But they're still ongoing, so
Yeah.
Because obviously that is a bigger problem in your hands, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, the magnitude obviously is, you know, it doesn't compare to a commercial vessel. The numbers are just, yeah, it's a huge scale of liabilities and exposures.
Well, we did have one case where the company were preparing the ship to, you know, to start the season. Half the crew members were flown in, and then obviously COVID put a stop to everything and everybody, and then those crew members were stuck, and it took forever to be able to get them home. I mean, we've seen ship owners who've actually, you know, if they've got different ships in the area, they allocated a ship to take the crew members back home, you know, and take the quarantine and, you know, deal with all that. I was in a meeting yesterday, and it was reported by one company that they managed to, in June, to undertake 50% of the crew changes that they had to make, which is very good news. Another company reported, you know, big numbers, you know, three digits. So I really empathize with the people who are doing crew changes at the moment, and HR departments and ship owners and crew managers. I think that is a huge task that they have to undertake at the moment. And what about post repatriation? Just to wrap this up, we've been talking about mental health. What about post repatriation? These people have been exhausted. Some of them have been on board for 15 months or whatever. I mean, we've seen Panama extending, you know, licenses to 17 months last week. So what about their mental health? What about, do you anticipate that you will be having claims, you know, afterwards?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not, but it is a possibility. The way, you know, crew changes have just been deferred for months now. Thankfully, some ports are opening up. We just got word that Hong Kong opened up for crew changes under certain restrictions. So, I mean, it looks like it's slowly starting to open up, but nevertheless, there are approximately 200,000 crew members that are just stuck on vessels, commercial vessels right now across the world. Obviously, there are a lot of resources available, and I mean, BIMCO recently posted a comprehensive page citing very useful resources, you know, where seafarers can reach out for psychological support. You know, there's ISWAN that has very useful short videos and guidelines, Seafarer Help, that offers a free helpline via telephone or live internet chat. So there are a lot of resources out there that are available, and that without a charge, that we just need to encourage seafarers to actually seek them out and not be embarrassed, you know, to use them, which is often, you know, an impediment.
Thank you, Joanna. We are going through the last 15 minutes of, you know, the time that the platform allows us. The audience, and we still have quite a few people still online. If you have any questions, please post them now. We still have 15 minutes. In the meantime, I'll give to everybody the floor for a closing remark, starting from Ana Paula again.
Okay, well, I think that for what we said here, yes, crew will be in place and will continue to be on the front line of all this situation post from the pandemic, arising from the pandemic. There's still a lot of issues that we need to manage as an industry, and how I think that it's possible that we're gonna see some other crises coming. We know that the pandemic is not over. It's easing a bit. We are sailing now, as I said, in more friendly waters, as we see countries is easing now their restrictions. But we also know that new waves can come, and after all, everything that we lived in the past, 4 or 5 months this year, my view is that we are more ready to face any new challenges that come, and they will, I guess, and they will come on a new ways, but they will. And then overall, as I said, we came, I think, as better, out at the end of all this, from the beginning that we saw. We are just looking at and say, okay, this will be a disaster, economically speaking, and for the industry, for everybody. And what we see today from the market itself, it's that, okay, we may not have the best rates ever in the market, but the markets are firming, the markets are getting steady, and we didn't see that crash that was signalizing at the beginning. We didn't see that crash as people were thinking of. So we are I think that the industry came, I think, is a little bit stronger than we enter in this, and I think learning more and getting a little bit more ready for any other new challenge that we might face ahead.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure and an honor. Going to Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, I was going to pretty much say the same as Anna, in the fact that, we've lived now with this pandemic for the last sort of 3-4 months, and we've all learned a lot of lessons from it. And I think P&I clubs included have also learned that, there's different aspects that needed to be addressed. And the IG group, I think, have done a fantastic job as well, Joanna. But there are, the resources are online. As Joanna mentioned, there are lots of different areas where the seafarers can get advice for the mental health issues and the stress involved, to make use of that. Also for ship owners and charterers and people in the industry generally, the P&I sites, all the IG group clubs have got very detailed information on their websites, and I think you have to just make as much use as possible of the resources available online. And of course, we're always here to assist with pick up the phone, ask us a question. We're here to help.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm not really sure I have much more to add to what Anna, Paula, and Liz said. I think these have been very interesting months. We have learned a lot, and we have learned it very quickly. We have a wealth of information now in our hands to be able to meet the challenges and be better prepared, because the pandemic is not over and it's probably going to come stronger again, but we're much better prepared now. And like Liz said, and Joanna before me, the IG group has been doing and is still doing a fantastic job with giving all the resources to the owners and their crew members mostly, to be able to deal with everything that has been going through. And I think we'll just keep on working on that. And as I said, we will be stronger as time passes. We'll be much more ready for the next challenge.
And last but not last, Joanna Koukouli, your comments and also your closing remark in terms of going forward with you know, the IG and how the IG, what the IG has learned as a group from this, because we've all learned something, definitely.
Yes, it's, I mean, I obviously I share my co-panelists' thoughts, and I fully agree that indeed we have now a wealth of experiences that we have gathered through this pandemic. The IG, also at a working group level where I sit, I mean, it has been a truly remarkable experience, you know, as we were dealing with situations live and having to troubleshoot and you know, holding meetings ad hoc to deal with really hot subjects. You know, I feel that this pandemic has made us much wiser as an industry, and has definitely kind of demonstrated the weaknesses of the industry, because you know, what crew members are experiencing obviously is the result of a serious weakness due to obviously we're not able to influence governments. We can only try and persuade them, and we're doing our best in this respect, and so are international organizations. But there is a missing link there, let's say, that was really brought forward from this pandemic, unfortunately, and hopefully we will find a way to mend it, to mend this void going forward. Thank you. It was a pleasure participating, and truly a pleasure. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thank you for joining, ladies. Thank you for being part of this panel. We are receiving very good remarks from our audience. Thank you to the audience who have been watching us for the last hour and a half, and thank you for your questions and for making this conversation even more interesting than what we had initially perhaps anticipated. Definitely we've all learned something. We've had to go fast forward in many respects. And as Ana Paula said, I would keep the optimistic comment of we thought it was going to be worse, and we did it in a better way that we thought we would have done. It just shows the resilience, at least of the industry, but I'm also keeping everybody else's comments in that none of us can resolve big problems like this on our own. Industries, governments, international bodies at all levels need to cooperate to resolve something as big as that and with a worldwide impact as this. And I hope that this is going to be the best lesson that everybody's going to learn out of this, beyond the rules, beyond the challenges, beyond everything. Ladies, thank you very much. It's been an honor and a privilege. Go WISTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to Natalia and Yuda, who are behind the scenes and have organized this for us, because I'm completely hopeless. I couldn't have done it. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.